So Ken, welcome back, Ken. We really appreciate you joining us today for our Murowood Center program about golf. And this is in conjunction with the FEL program, Friends Enjoying Life, the men's program. Ken is a longtime Jewish communal professional in St. Louis, and he is an avid sports historian. He especially loves golf and the history around golf. So he is going to present to us today golf's golden age. Welcome, Ken, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Judy. And hello, everyone. It is great to see all of you, many of whom I go back almost 40 years with, including the FEL founder, Harvey Gerstein, and so many others. From my years at the JCC, Jewish Federation, and more recently in private consulting. But thank you, Judy, for your technical support. And we're going to have some fun. And this is going to be an interactive opportunity. And at a point where I may ask questions for you or challenges, particularly when we get to the end, about your opinions of the greatest golfer of all time. Going back to 100 plus years ago to the present, I want you speaking up, okay? And sharing your golf memories as well as mine. Background, okay? I grew up the perfect sweet spot as a baby boomer. We had a television set as early as probably 1952 in my home, and I'm going to be 71 in June. So, and having a father and an older brother, big time sports fans, I got glued to it early and immersed. And particularly, golf fascinated me because it was something I could play. Beginning when I was 11 years old, maybe a little bit earlier, at a local muni course in Buffalo. Now, what has captured my imagination were the great golf heroes. And Judy, can you, next slide, please? Or first slide?
Sure.
Okay.
There we go. Can you see it?
Okay. Now, we're going to focus, ladies and gentlemen, on 1960 to 1970. Next slide, please. Why am I choosing this? Golf was maybe interesting, before World War II, you may not be aware, but the most popular sport via attendance in the United States before the war was horse racing, thoroughbred racing. Tracks, I know St. Louis did not have, in the Missouri side, thoroughbred racing, still doesn't. However, around the country. And then, of course, you had baseball, college football, boxing, college basketball, and golf. And before the war, it was the era of Bobby Jones, Walter Hagan, Gene Sarazen, he of the 1935 Triple Eagle on 15 in Augusta that propelled him to fame. But you needed to wait till you went to your local Fox Theater or Paramount or Orpheum, wherever city you grew up, to see newsreels. And there were radio broadcasts, but we barely knew who these people were. The war comes. Great golfers like the Ben Hogans, Sam Sneads, Jimmy Demerits, and so many other professional golfers who did have good name recognition went to the service. 1945, the war ends. But the year before, and this is important, the Congress passed the GI Bill of Rights in June of 1944, and it didn't make much headlines then, but I consider it one of the 2 or 3 most important pieces of legislation of the 20th century, probably after the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts in, I think, their global importance, and probably Medicare. The GI Bill of Rights, what did it do? It created the middle class, of which I was born into. It provided virtually low-cost mortgages, the ability for the 16 million returning servicemen and women to be able to start a new life with all types of government support, socialism, as you may want to call it. But in 1946, no one was complaining. My dad opened Army Navy surplus stores in Buffalo, was able to get a VA 2% mortgage, probably with $5,000 down for a lovely home in a U City-like neighborhood. And tax dollars. The workers were booming. By 47, 48, after a brief contraction, golf courses were being, muni courses were being built or expanded all over in these new suburbs that were potato fields before the war. Now, from, if you think Northwest South County, communities like Ferguson, Florissant, Bridgeton, all built, St. Anne, go west, and in south, Crestwood and the like. Golf courses became prevalent, and they were accessible to the GI, the children of the Depression. Who would have thought? Where St. Louis had the Forest Park courses before the war and little else, suddenly by 1950, there were dozens of courses coming through. But sadly, in the last bullet, African Americans were still denied, in most places, the opportunities to be equal to whites in playing golf, especially in the South. St. Louis, until the 1950s, only allowed African Americans to play Forest Park on Mondays, as an example. Our schools were still segregated in the city and county until Brown v. Board of Education. And it was a sad saga, which we have heard so much about recently, but it's a factor that did play and still factors into who plays golf to this day. Next slide, please. Now, we're going to go to the fabulous 50s briefly. And who was the first great superstar to emerge? And there was a wealth of terrific golfers, from the Porky Olivers to the Sam Sneads, Kerry Middlecoff, Dr. Kerry Middlecoff, who was a dentist, among other things, and Lloyd Mangrum, Mike Suchek, who we're going to see from a little bit later. But in 1948, he won his second U.S. Open and was the leading money winner. Now, to be a leading money winner in the 1950s was to maybe earn a total of $30,000 for the whole year. Bantam Ben Hogan, out of Fort Worth, Texas, 5'8", never more than 140 pounds, but maybe the greatest stroke maker in golf history. But yet, driving from the Phoenix Open to his home in Fort Worth in February of 48, a bus, a Greyhound-like bus, slammed into Hogan's. Thank God he was driving a Cadillac, which in those years was the size of a cruise ship. And Hogan, to save the life of his beautiful wife, Valerie, jumped in front of her. Terrible crash. But in doing so, his gallantry to save his wife saved his life and Valerie's. But Hogan was a wreck that equals to what Tiger Woods suffered 2 months ago in his near fatal car injury. His legs were shattered. And we'll get to what occurred within 15 months after that. Now, what opened up golf to the masses above and beyond the expansion of courses and the money to pay for golf was television. It had been popular on radio, and the first United States Open occurred in St. Louis. Televised Open was right down Ladue Road at the St. Louis Country Club, where the U.S. Open was televised. And we got to remember, St. Louis was one of the golf capitals of the United States. It still is, by the way. Look at 3 years ago, with the wonderful PGA, where Belle Reve has become the modern St. Louis Country Club and hosting tournaments. And it was wonderful. And year by year, the majors, the Masters, PGA, later the British Open, and the US Open got golf coverage. And by the mid-50s, smaller tournaments were emerging. And suddenly, golf had doubled in golfers in the US. Many of your aunts, uncles, dads were now playing 23 million. By 1950, however, Ben Hogan had recovered well enough to play a limited number of series, to walk slowly, to have bandages put on by his wife every day, literally from hip to toes, to give him the support. And it was called the Miracle at Merion. Ben Hogan, in a playoff, won the 1950 U.S. Open at the Merion Club outside of Philadelphia. And in 1953, and Hogan is already 41 years old, won 3 of the 4 majors. It was the Masters, the British Open, which he had never played before, never played in England, and the US Open in one season. And who knows, he just didn't play the PGA because his legs needed a rest. He was the first golfer ever to be afforded a ticker-tape parade and then a visit to President Eisenhower in the late summer of 1953. Golf was on its way. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to say something controversial. I am saying Arnold Palmer, the late Arnold Palmer, who passed away several years ago, was the most influential athlete of the 20th century. Now, some could say Jack Dempsey, some could say, and Jordan would be close to second in my estimation. Was he the greatest golfer, greatest athlete of all time? No. Relatively close in golf. And he had a peak era of 6 years, where other golfers like Jack Nicklaus extended for 20 years, winning majors and the like. But why am I saying Palmer? And now, if you want to give, I want your opinion. Why is Arnold Palmer the most influential athlete of the 20th century? And unmute your microphones, folks, and agree or disagree with me for a minute. Anyone? Arlene.
I agree with you. He was the one that got me interested in golf. Arnold
Really?
Palmer. He had such charisma. I mean, Arnie's Army, and he just had a way about him that I would sit in front of the TV and watch and watch. I thought he was terrific.
Very
He
good.
really was the one that got me interested.
He got you interested, and you made a great point. Whoever had a gallery named after them? Arnold. And by the way, he was a veteran of the Coast Guard,
Oh.
albeit, but he was a veteran. Any other comments about my theory of influence?
And he was very personable. People could associate with him. He wasn't
Yes.
some superstar that nobody could touch or nobody could connect with. And as the lady said, Arnie's Army. I mean, he brought golf into everybody's home, and he was a person just like everybody else.
That's right.
Great point, Al. Thank you for bringing that up. His willingness to sign autographs to literally the week before he died was extraordinary amongst athletes, and far more willing, personable than most of his peers at that time, particularly the ones who preceded him. They were good people, but they were focused on their game, going to the 19th hole for their drink and libations and to catch up with friends. But Palmer stayed to the last autograph, whether he shot an 80 or won a Masters. All right, Palmer, we're going to stay with him because, right or wrong, not only was he incredibly influential, but from 1958 to 1964, he was dominant. He won his 7 majors during that 6-year time span. And the 1960 Masters, which, Arlene, I know you were glued to your 12-day cocoa in beautiful Memphis, Tennessee, waiting for an Elvis sighting when he played touch football behind your grandmother's house. Am I right, Arlene?
Oh, yeah.
All right. But 1960 Masters came down to a duel between Ben Hogan's protege, Ken Burke, who was supposed to be the next superstar of the 60s, and Palmer won on the 18th with a birdie at Augusta, and suddenly Arnie's Army emerged. Palmer was this thin man. He would have that L&M cigarette. I can remember it was always L&M, Liggett and Myers cigarette company. That was his brand, the flip top box. And he would flick it on the green. It's amazing. I'm not a chain smoker to this day, modeling after him, but he would flick the cigarette on the green, and in that bow-legged style of putting, captured America. And he became the megastar. Next slide, please. Why? And again, my friend Arlene alluded to this. Television. In 1947, when the U.S. Open was televised at St. Louis Country Club, there may have been 2,000 commercial TV sets in the United States. By 1960, the year of the Kennedy-Nixon debates, 80% of all American homes, well over 50 million homes, had television. And golf was made for television, not unlike boxing, football, and wrestling. Why? Because the camera could focus on charismatic young players or old players, making a charge from where only the 18th hole was covered. By the mid-50s, 15, 16, 17, and 18 were covered. And by 1960, videotape started, video replay became, but you could see the players, they were not wearing helmets. You could see how they looked, how they sweated, how they fretted, how they smoked and struck the ball. The drama was captured. Yes. And Arlene, you were an outlier. It was mostly a male audience. And remember the sponsors, Lucky Strike, L&M cigarettes, Gold, Budweiser. What
Oh,
other
yeah.
great products? And open your microphones if you want to, I can remember the great beers of the time. I was a kid in Buffalo, but I knew of Falstaff, which was at one point selling more beer than AB, and Budweiser, and the great Milwaukee beers, Platts, Schlitz. I mean, I grew up their theme songs from watching golf tournaments, MLB, pro football. But golf found its niche on TV, and ratings, especially for the majors to this day, are amongst the highest in the country. And I had a Westing, my parents bought a 1955 Westinghouse that looks exactly like the TV on your screen. All right, next slide, please. No man stands alone. And after the war and during the 50s, as we talk about the emergence of golf courses, new country clubs and the like, and instructors who were able to find work, new golfers emerged. And suddenly, and I hated two guys until adulthood. I hated them. And they were Gary Player of South Africa, again, an extremely generous, wonderful guy, and at that time, the fat kid from Columbus, Ohio, whose father owned a pharmacy, and his name was Jack Nicklaus, built more like an offensive tackle. And he did play high school football, but his dad was a fine golfer and had Jack on the public and private courses in the Columbus area. And by 1960, he was a national amateur champion at the ripe age of 20. Gary Player had won the 58 British Open, came to America, and 1961, he dethroned the king, Arnold Palmer, from the Masters Championship. This, again, the size of Ben Hogan, 5'8", and it destroyed my image of the king. I mean, I was saddened. And by 1962, Nicklaus beat Palmer in a playoff outside of Pittsburgh at Oakmont for the 1962 U.S. Open Championship. And suddenly I kept calling him I was terrible, a fat pig, one of the most decent athletes ever. But he and Player were dethroning the king.
Right.
Now, look at the picture on the right-hand side. Some of you were with me that day. It was at Belle Reve when the U.S. Senior Open was held on a hot August day in 2004. And I was able to score a ticket. One of the great perks of being the CEO of the Jewish Community Center, I could make some phone calls and things could come my way. That and meeting celebrities at the Jewish Book Festival. So my favorite, by the way, was Jack Klugman, the great actor. In any case, I was at that Open, and all I wanted to see was Palmer, Nicklaus, and Player, who were paired for a full round, not paired so much, but as a trio, grouped. And all I wanted to do was to see them play one hole. That's it. And I went home. I saw the three guys who made golf into the super strata. Before the Tom Watsons, before the Phil Mickelsons, the Tiger Woods, these three guys for 15 years, in one way or another, Palmer, Player, Nicklaus. Now, the merging of television, disposable income, was a phenomena that was only starting to become prevalent to very few people who were in the marketing end. And an agent for a golfer, Hollywood movie stars had agents. A golfer, an athlete, unheard of, not to be. And most golfers were able to get sponsors, and they typically were either McGregor or Wilson. Arnold Palmer was Wilson. Remember the old Wilson
Right.
staff of clubs? I'm seeing some nods. And Palmer had signed in 1956. No, when he 55, when he won his first tournament, the Canadian Open, as a with Wilson, and they had contracts. They'd get all the free clubs they wanted and minimal dollars. But there was a young man out of Cleveland, Ohio, that saw a greater potential. Can anybody name who I'm speaking of? The first great agent in North America, 60 years ago. He created what we call IMG, which is still the greatest purveyor of exhibitions, sporting events, and television networks. Golf, particularly for college football and basketball, independent of the networks. I'm speaking of a young man named Mark McCormick. Mark McCormick is maybe the most unsung influential figure in American sports in the 20th century, because he created representation as we know it of athletes, being able to get rights fees for exhibitions, to get sponsorships. Remember, we saw Arnold Palmer to this day. Who can name some of the products that Palmer was pitching up to almost the week he died? Open your microphones. I'll start with L&M cigarettes. What else did he pitch? Pennzoil.
Right.
He used to drive, you remember the ads where he was driving a tractor on his dad's golf course. And he said, we keep this tractor oiled up with Pennzoil. And I mentioned Arnold Palmer iced tea. And remember the shirts with the umbrella?
Oh, yeah.
I'm forgetting the manufacturer. Jack Nicklaus with McGregor.
Right.
And the list goes on and on. I was 11 years old watching Gary Player at the end of his first Masters title, drinking a Pepsi on the air. And I said, Mommy, I want Pepsi. And at that point, she said, no, it'll spoil your dinner. But I think I snuck one in anyway. The influence of advertising. And Mark McCormick, why did he matter? He created the world that has been inhabited by the agencies that represent the Tiger Woods, the Michael Jordans, LeBron James, the models of athletes creating their own business empires, as did Palmer with Arnold Palmer Enterprises, his golf design business, and management of courses, Jack Nicklaus, and the like. Next slide, please. Now, we're going to have some fun. We're going to actually see a bit of a 2-minute highlight of maybe the most, I think, important US Open finish in history. Why? It was the back nine at Cherry Hill. Where is Cherry Hill, by the way? Anybody?
Jersey?
No. Good guess, though. Outside of Denver, Colorado. Beautiful course, still hosts majors periodically. Well, the U.S. Open at that time only was played over 3 days in good weather or bad, heat, etc. Opening round Thursday, second round Friday, rounds 3 and 4 Saturday, with a half-hour break for lunch in the clubhouse. So, the greatest U.S. Open in United States history. The fourth, and Palmer, who had 3 months earlier had won, 2 months earlier, had won his second Masters, which we just alluded to over Ken Venturi. Jack Nicklaus, the great amateur, but still way overweight, but powerful, still learning the game. And the greatest of all, Bantam Ben Hogan, who only played, because of his legs, 7 tournaments a year, had not won a major since 1954, had tied with Jack Fleck, unknown, who forced Fleck into Hogan into a playoff and beat him for the 55 Open. Hogan is now 48 years old, could still barely walk an 18-hole course without supports. After 16 at Cherry Hill, the confluence of one golf tournament, one round, 1 3-hole span, 16, 17, and 18, arguably 3 of the greatest golfers in history. The confluence of 3 immortals, back 9 at Cherry Hill. Next slide, please. Let's go to the movies, viewers. Can we get the sound, please?
Can you hear it? Is it?
It broke.
The 60th United States.
Sorry, can you get that?
Keep going. All right, just
Okay. Can you hear the sound?
The 60th United States Open Golf Championship on the Cherry Hills course at Denver with the snow-capped Rockies as the backdrop. Ben Hogan among the contenders starting the final round. Jack Nicklaus, brilliant amateur. Julius Boros, 52 champion. Suchak setting the pace. Jack Fleck, 1955 upset winner. Ted Cole making a strong bid. The final day is one of the most exciting ever seen in the Open. As Suchak slips, Boros, Fleck, Jerry Barber, Dutch Harrison, Dolph Finskewald, and Nicklaus all threaten. Then out of the blue comes a thunderbolt. Arnold Palmer, the Masters champion, starting the last round 7 strokes behind Suchak, puts on a blistering rally. The man from the Pennsylvania Steel Regions ties the tournament record for 9 holes with a 30, scoring birdies on 6 of the first 7 holes. Then the leaders stumble. Hogan collapses with a 6 and 7 on the last 2 holes. Suchak surrenders to the pressure on the final round and finishes with a 75 that leaves him tied for 3rd place at 283. Surprise of the tournament is the young amateur Nicklaus. His 282 takes 2nd place. Then comes Palmer. From the edge of the last green, he rolls a chip right up beside the hole. Then Palmer drops the putt and tosses his cap in the air as he wins with a sensational last round 65 and a score of 280. An amazing triumph with the most sensational rally in Open golf history.
wow. Okay, great. Thank you, Judy. Stay with this, slide you have now. Open microphones. Does anybody remember the back 9 at Cherry Hill, June 1960? I do. I was watching with my father and brother, and I was focused to Palmer and thrilled when Ben Hogan simply overhit the green on 17 and then on 18 disaster, which put him in 5th place for the tournament. And he never, ever was close again in a major as he was approaching 50 by that time. And Nicklaus, whoa, a ripple of fear. Who is this guy? And is he going to be a threat to the king? Well, after 18 majors, he was. So, but they became best of friends later on. Mm-hmm. So we have taken the 1960s. Let's look at this before we get into some fun things about the most, let's say, the greatest golfer of all time, in your opinion, my opinion, whoever. Okay. In 1960 to 70, golf tripled its TV ratings. The agents came into play. Suddenly, we could see golf shows on Saturday and Sunday afternoons, even in the middle of winter, like championship golf, celebrity golf, hosted by retiring pros like Jimmy Demaret, Kerry Middlecoff, Gene Saracen. Remember Shell's wonderful world of golf, where every week there would be a different course. Mm-hmm. And Saracen, who is in his mid-60s, remember, he won that with his eagle on 15 and 35, the Masters. He wore those knickers, gravelly voice, but he would have a different pro with him on courses around the world. And it was amazing. And you had other top pros emerge. Billy Casper, some say the greatest putter of all time. Gay Brewer, 1967 Masters. Gene Littler, 61 U.S. Open. Julius Boros, who looked like he was 80 years old on the course, even when he was 30. And he always had a cigarette in his mouth. He had lived till he was in his 90s. Was maybe the smoothest swinger in the game. Won the 52 and 65 U.S. Open. And others, Dow Finsterwald, Mike Suchak, the ex-football player at Duke, never won a major, but was among the top 10. And then the young Tom Watson, who happens to be my age, 71, who integrated the country club, integrated for Jews, the country club of Kansas City. He married a Jewish woman, still happily married, and Tom Watson said, "You want me? Then you're going to take others of my faith." One of the little things of the emerging pros who developed their personalities in the 1960s. To me, that golden era. Leigh Trevino came onto the scene. Won 2 U.S. Open. No, won an Open and a PGA, and still with us, thank God. And with a great personality, Juan Chichi Rodriguez, who after making a good putt would act like a matador, from Puerto Rico, and the list. And go back to African Americans.
Right.
The first great African American golfer was a gentleman named World War II veteran Charlie Sifford, who smoked a cigar on the course. He led the way, along with then Lee Elder, who was the first African American to ever win a PGA sanctioned tournament. But remember, around the country, and the PGA was, if there was a sad part of even Palmer player and Nicklaus, they were slow to use their influence with the PGA and the USGA, United States Golf Association, to give African Americans their fair shot. And it really wasn't until the 70s that pressures emerged to those organizations to open up tournaments and begin welcoming people of not only African American, but Asian descent as well. And that is a sad, none of us are perfect, but we have to be, golf was not played like any sport. But if there were Jackie Robinsons of golf, Charlie Sifford with the cigar, and Lee Elder. Okay. Now, I'm going to offer an apology. I have slides, I think 3 slides that are supposed to list one expert's opinion of the 10 greatest golfers. But for some reasons, I think number 3 and 5 and 7 or something were left out. But there's enough there that can evoke controversy. So, Judy, can you get to the next slide? I think that's where we'll begin. All right. We'll start with number 10. What was this young man's nickname, and who was his best friend from childhood? They caddied together at public courses in Fort Worth, Texas. He was Lord Byron Nelson, who emerged before the war as one of the greatest PGA players. As a young man, he sadly had, and he wanted to serve, but he was not physically fit for military service. So he played on the tour, and he won amazingly 12 tournaments in a row in a depleted field during the war years, but still. And then with the emergence of the Ben Hogans and Sneeds and others after the war, he retired and just played exhibitions, became a successful businessman, but he was Lord Byron, and you couldn't beat him. Okay, Judy, next slide. The aforementioned Todd Watson. Some say he could be ranked even more. 8 majors, one more than Palmer. 5 U.S. Open championships. And unbelievable. Climb the heights. And again, Byron Nelson was a mentor. And when Watson was only 24, became a student, a mentee of Lord Byron. Next, please. Okay, now, I remember a half hour ago I said, and I'm keeping an eye on my watch, I know we're at a time limit, Arnold Palmer. Again, he never won a Masters after his 34th birthday, never won a major after his 34th. And what major did he never win? Anybody? The PGA. Struggle. Player, and Nicklaus would beat him in playoffs. He would be second or third during his peak years in the 60s, but he could never win a PGA. But yet, the influences and everything else that we've talked about Palmer made him so influential and important. Still, one of the 10 greatest golfers ever to lace on the spikes. Next slide. The Immortal Bobby. Bobby was the first American golf real hero in the age of radio and newsreels. Yes, Francis Ouimet in the 1916, I believe, U.S. Open captured the country. But Bobby Jones, 5-time amateur U.S. champion. And where did he win? I believe 2 of those at the St. Louis Country Club. A funny anecdote. I actually, when I was consulting about 4 years ago, I found a client who, as a hobby, opened up a t-shirt shop because he was bored. He was a gentleman who had worked for Commerce Bank, I'll say old St. Louis money, who was 2nd or 3rd generation St. Louis Country Club. So I said, John Hall, said, John, some of you may know him. Could you take me for lunch someday at the St. Louis Country Club? And honest to God. And he did. And I stood, I think, 20 minutes staring at the trophy case of players who won tournaments at that club, the greatest in history, but above all, Bobby Jones, when the St. Louis Country Club was one of the 4 or 5 leading tournament sites in North America before they deferred that to the younger Belle Reeve and other clubs. Number 6, slamming Sammy Snead. And maybe the most graceful shooter of all time. Power and grace, 7 majors, but Bantam Ben, including that hot June day in 1947, could not win a U.S. Open in an amazing career. And Sammy was playing and winning tournament golf until his mid-50s, and a veteran of the United States Army. Sammy Snead, remember the hat? The Bermuda hat is such that he looked like he was going to get on a cruise ship every time he played. And out of the Greenbrier Country Club in Greenbrier, West Virginia. Let's keep going. Gary Player, who I hated because he dethroned the king in the 61 Masters, but what a wonderful gentleman who did tremendous amounts in the last 40 years to help integrate golf and other areas in his native South Africa. Gary Player, a gentleman, 165 wins on 6 continents. And then prior and a great rival, early rival of Bobby Jones, the Hague, Walter Hagan, 11 major champions. Had he come along 10, 15 years later, he could have been the hero that Bobby Jones was. Jones, by the way, was the very first golfer to get the ticker tape parade after his combined amateur professional Grand Slam in 1930. But Hagan was a tremendous golfer, charismatic, and the British Open, but failed to win a Masters. But in fairness, he was already an older golfer by the time of the first Masters in 1935. Judy, next one. Bantam Ben Hogan. Again, from 1949 on, could only play 7 tournaments a year, but his ability to win majors, particularly as somebody who had been crippled by that terrible car accident. By the way, it was a good advertisement for Cadillacs today. He was driving a caddy, and that caddy withstood a Greyhound bus. With whatever was up front, an engine that George Patton would have been proud of, that was, key for Hogan. But many say he was the greatest art stroke player, meaning he could size up distance, timing, pick the right club, pick the right swing, right way to face the club, and strike the ball. The greatest ball striker who ever lived. Need I say more about Tiger Woods? Despite his ups and downs, he, to my son's generation, who is 38 years old, and Generation X, the youngest boomers, Generation Y, the millennials, where my son fits. Tiger Woods is their Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus combined. Next one. that fat kid from Columbus, did he ever trim down 18 majors? Maybe Woods with 15 could have had a shot. Maybe when he gets back, he'll have a comeback like Hogan, and playing into his late 40s, 50s, maybe Woods will surpass. But the Golden Bear is, just take a look and read what I'm reading. 5 U.S. Open championships. Entrepreneur, businessman, and on. 73 victories in his career. 18, a wonderful family man and a hero to his peers and beyond. And Jack Nicklaus, among others, is going to be when there is a big senior tournament at Norwood Hills in September. He is going to be here, and I'll be, if I still have to wear this, I will be there to see the Golden Bear. All is forgiven, Jack Nicklaus. All is forgiven. Final slide. I think that's it.
Yeah.
So I've almost exceeded my time limit, and I see Harvey Gerstein among others, but if we have 5 more minutes or whatever, I'm not going anywhere. I hope this has been a bit entertaining and maybe a little informative, bringing back memories of your childhoods, that and, being with mom, dad in front of the TV, or going for your first round at Ruth Park or Forest Park, and the like, as kids taking up the game, but learning and enjoying about those heroes of the golden age of golf, 1960 to 1970 and on. Oh, and I'm seeing now lots of good people. Myron Holtzman, one of the greatest baseball writers in North America in the last half of the 20th century,
Hey,
past
Ken,
president, Baseball Writers Association of America, and
Ken,
the like.
you mentioned Francis Ouimet in passing.
Yes.
Did you ever
Yes.
see the movie The Greatest Game Ever Played?
I have. Please.
I think that's
Share
my
your
favorite
reminiscence.
golf movie of all time.
Why?
But getting back to your favorites, obviously Arnold Palmer was my favorite also,
Right.
because he used to go for the broke, every shot.
Every shot.
And I think that's what endeared him to much of the public.
Mhm.
And one last
Right.
memory, we had Gary Player at one of our St. Louis Sports Hall of Fame events
Right.
at Chaminade High School. And some of the Chaminade golfers were there, and several other high school golfers were there. And after he spoke, he went into the crowd and was actually giving lessons to some of these players. I mean, you talk about how personable some of them could be.
Really?
I mean, he was great.
Wow. And Myron, by the way, I hope to see you on one of these broadcasts again soon, too.
Okay.
Your wealth of knowledge of all sports, not only baseball, is incredible.
Thank you.
Oh, of course. Any other reminiscences or thoughts or comments, disagreements? Arleno.
Oh, I still agree with Arnold Palmer, and he's right. He would go for broke. It's just,
Oh, you know something? I just think secretly you wanted him to fly in on his private plane to Memphis and ask you to that high school senior prom.
Oh, I saw him play in Memphis. I definitely did. Oh, yeah.
You did?
There
Wow.
were several golf tournaments that were held in Memphis when I was growing
Sure.
up.
It's a
Oh,
very
yeah.
good golf town. Right.
Harvey.
Ken, and everyone, I was in the apparel business, and in the, I guess it was in the late 1980s, I went into China,
Right.
and we went into a small little city where they were manufacturing goods, and then for lunch, they took us up into the wilderness, I thought, and we saw people using lawnmowers to push their carts, etc. And we ended up going to their country club, and it was designed by, the golf course was designed by Arnold Palmer, and there was
Wow.
all kinds of pictures of Palmer all over the walls. And they had women going around the golf course picking up leaves, and they had to keep it clean.
Sure.
But here I was in the middle of nowhere, and Arnold Palmer was their hero.
There you go.
Wow. By the way, parenthetically, I'm sitting in the Mirowitz Center here at Covenant Place, which in due time will be reopening in its glory again, the Mirowitz Center. But I have to give Harvey Gerstein credit, who 50 years ago literally made this complex possible. As a young community volunteer, businessman, raising a family with his wonderful wife, Wilma, made this the premier senior center on a Jewish campus possible.
Wow.
One young man, and that was Harvey Gerstein. Besides throwing great Super Bowl parties during the day as well. And welcoming a young 34-year-old Ken Weintraub and his 2-year-old boy and wife to their home so graciously just weeks after we had moved here. Never forget that. Anybody else today? Well, the timing is good. It's just about 11 a.m. I want to thank you. This has been a treat, a labor of love. I'm going to put up a book. This is The Eternal Summer, which describes, it's by Kurt Sampson, who has written biographies of Ben Hogan, Palmer. He's one of the great golf writers of all time. You can go on Amazon, The Eternal Summer, and that describes the summer of 1960, particularly focusing on the U.S. Open at Cherry Hill, the Masters, and on. But the rise of Mark McCormick and sports agency, The Eternal Summer, Kurt Sampson, Sampson. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
All
Ken.
right.
Thank you, Ken.
Thanks,
Thank you
Ken.
so
Good
much
seeing you
for
again.
giving
Yeah.
us a great presentation today. We were thrilled, and I just want to thank you and hope you back for another program at some other time. Thanks,
It
everyone.
would be
for
my
joining us.
honor and pleasure.
Good to
Okay.
see you, Ken.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Bye.